Welcome to the Applied Neuroscience Association podcast, your gateway to lifelong learning, where neuroscience meets allied disciplines, exploring ideas to enhance lives.
First of all, just thank you. What a thrill to be here getting to do this. I did a quick search in my emails while Tracy was talking, and I joined the ANA in September of 2023. So we remember just over a year now. And I didn't realize it'd been that long. So that's quite nice to find out. I went on this journey through many things. I started out years and years ago in project management, decades ago, and ended up doing coaching. And that sort of journey led me very much to the realization that psychology was a real focus for me. I just hadn't studied it formally. So I ended up doing a master's in business and organizational psychology. And I've been just growing and learning from there. I went to the Association of Business Psychology, now they're ANA, and other groups, the American Psychological Association, and just learning more and more and more. Probably like a lot of you, it's a sort of a fascination. It's a job, but it's also just a passion. And everyone says passion, don't they? Like on their resume, on their CV, and LinkedIn and things. It's an overused word, but it's genuinely something I find absolutely fascinating to my very core. I think within the world now, we're facing so many organizations that are trying to understand the male figure, because there's the very negative format of the domineering, authoritative, historic male figure. Or there's the current figure of how they fit into society, what's their role. And today I want to talk about just that side of things, right? That is what we're here to talk about, the International Men's Day. So I wanted to focus on it from an organizational point of view, because that is my area of focus, but also because it's probably most relevant to all of us. We all deal with men in organizations, whether we are one or we work with them. And most of the talks today very much sort of underline that. They're all very different topics, but most of the talks are very specific, because the speakers are very much specialists. I'm a bit more of a generalist, so I'm hoping some of what I'm talking about sort of underlines what they're saying. But I'll be sticking around to find out, so we shall see later on. I know I've got 50 minutes. I'm hoping to talk for about half an hour maybe, and then we've got 20 minutes you can ask me questions, we can have discussions, wherever it takes us. Okay. All right, with that said, I shall hopefully move on through some slides. There we go. Okay, great. So quickly, just who am I? Just a quick, you're wondering who I am, I'm sure, otherwise what am I talking about? So my name is Robert Annis. Rob or Robert is perfectly fine. I work as a business and organizational psychologist, which means I do a lot of work with leaders, with leadership teams, sort of C-level suites, but also directors, and also teams of any level, to be honest with you. It doesn't really matter to me to what level they're at. It's not really relevant. It's the individual and their interactions with others that interest me. So I've got qualifications in different areas that have allowed me to take on this career path, whether it be the psychological focus, or it be more on the leadership and management side of things. They're all complementary to what I do. So you probably don't care too much, so I won't go any further, but there's sort of some of my qualifications. GGS Partners is my company. That's why the logo is there. And I love the logo, it makes me smile. So, yeah. Okay. Just in the history of companies I've worked with, I'm not going to talk about any of these. I don't want to bore you. Just to say there's a lot of experience. I lack hair. I'm older now. I've had lots of clients. So it's a fair amount of experience. I tend to match theory with practice and experience. Most of my clients seem to like the fact that I can bring psychological theory, but also the experience that I've actually gone through as well. And that's led to these kind of clients. All right, that's it. Introduction's kind of done, apart from this one bit that I want to bring up. I do have one additional bit that I bring that is probably why I'm so focused on psychology, why it's so interesting to me. And that is that my brain has a few issues, like all of ours. We're not born perfect. I have a couple of different things. Aphantasia means I don't have a mind's eye. I can't imagine things in my head very well. I don't, people say, oh, don't think of the pink elephant. And then people always say, oh, all I can think of is a pink elephant. I don't have that. There's no imagery happening up here. When people say picture something, it's like a grey screen. There's nothing. I can't do it. And related to that, I don't see faces very well. At least I don't remember them. So I, for example, Tracia, we met before. I had no idea what you looked like. We got on the call today, and it's like, oh, that's what she looks like. And it works with everyone. My wife, I don't know what she looks like. So I lose her all the time. Indeed, just the other day, I got on the bus, and she got on the bus first. I bought the ticket. She went to sat down, and I turned around. I couldn't find her. And she saw me panicking, so she sort of, was signaling to me. So yeah, that's a real problem for doing the job I do. Go into a meeting room and you meet a leader again, and you don't know who they are. It's not ideal. Makes life quite difficult. And it's only recently, a few years ago, during COVID, I found out that I had this. I've just been dealing with it for 40 odd years. I thought everyone was the same way. And then also a late finding out of my autism, ADHD. That's relatively recent, so that's all been recognized as well, but that's taken care of now. So again, it explains a lot of things. Why do I bring these things up? Because it's really helpful to me. It means I do see people differently. I do experience the world differently to other people, and I think that's part of why I do what I do. I do bring a different point of view because I see things differently. I think that helps. There's other things there. I have pretty much no memory and depression, things like that. I do some work with neurodiversity in business as well now, which sort of led me down that path. So it's really interesting getting involved with organizations focusing on the neurodiversity side of things. Okay, that's a bit more about me. Hopefully now we've connected a little bit, you know a bit more. Let's move on to the actual topic we came to talk about. Oh, and just to say, this is my little autism pin. So that's what the icon is in the top corner. All right. So let's just talk about the world as it is. So whether you're talking about neuroscience or psychology or whatever, the world's a very complicated place, right? What's inside our head is very complicated. You all know 86 billion neurons firing away, doing their business. But then out here, we've got 8 or 9 billion people as well, all with that going on. So incredibly complex, right? We look to the stars thinking the galaxy and the universe are complex. But when you consider the amount of moving parts with our brains, the amount of people on Earth, it's staggering how much is going on. And we tend to look at it in very, very simple view, just because it's easier to talk about it that way. Our communication standards are so low, right? We make mistakes all the time in communicating, that we simplify everything, right? So every big project the government does, they fail because they oversimplify it, right? Every time we try and do some large project at work, most of the time it runs over and we spend more, take more time than we thought we would need, right? The world is more complex than we tend to think it is. So what does that mean? There's lots going on, right? But let's be specific. What does that mean? Well, we've got things like climate change. Politics are constantly changing around the world at the moment, right? There's a lot of wild stuff going on in the politics scene at the moment. Globalization, right? There's very few companies that are just in one town or even one country anymore. Most organizations have a supply chain that crosses the planet, right? That shifts everything about how companies work. It's no longer you're working in one office, you're working around the world, right? Our society is no longer the same as it was 15 years ago. It's completely shifted. Our values are nothing like they were just a decade and a half ago. Nothing like it. You cannot speak out loud now and say the same things now that you would have said 15, 20 years ago. That's completely gone, completely different now. We've had global recessions, global pandemics, and that seems kind of okay because we've had them and we've lived through it, but they were massive impacts on all of us, right? The power structure across the world shifted, technology is going crazy, AI, right? You may have heard of it. So there's just so much going on. It's such a complex world that we're trying to understand. So there's a lot of models we use, simulations, to try and go, well, how do we work in this situation? How do we understand it? And it leads on to, well, how do men exist in situations? That's why I'm covering it. One of the most common models we use in business is called VUCA. And some of you may have heard of it. It was created in 1995 by the US Army. And it was just trying to understand the new world we were living in. And it's been transferred into the business world because it just works really, really well. Primarily because it helps us challenge our current mindset understanding of the world, right? We tend to view things as going from A to B. I want to do something to get there. I need to do this, so I'll go and do it. The world is much more complex than that, right? There's loads of things acting on it. Things aren't simple anymore, as I just showed on the last slide. So we tend to see the world now as being quite volatile, quite uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen, right? We have an idea, but we don't know. In that sense, it's very complex, right? It's chaotic, but it's also ambiguity. All of these things come together and give us a worldview which is difficult. Yes, that's difficult as an individual, but as groups, as a company or as a team or a department, it's almost insurmountable. So most organizations refuse to view the world like this and simply go, well, what have we done for the last 50 years? And they continue that way, right? If you look at, I don't know, British Airways was in the news today, massive IT failure, and they've had multiple massive IT failures. And they've said they're investing to try and solve the problem. But at the same time, they're paying massive dividends and huge amounts to their CEO. They're not changing their approach at all and saying we need to actually make a shift to our way of working. They're simply going, we'll carry on doing what we've always done, but we'll invest a bit of extra money. They're not recognizing the world has shifted and they are being outcompeted in every possible way because they're simply going, well, what I've done before has worked, so I'll continue doing it. And that's a brain problem, right? That's the kind of, I've lived in the cave and the cave has kept me safe, so I should stay in the cave, right? Very good thinking if you live in a cave, not good thinking in the modern world. But that is unfortunately how our brains are working. We need to be thinking more in this way. You take VUCA, take that same acronym, and you respond to that complex world with vision, with understanding, with courage and adaptability. With this, you can build out leaders, companies, organizations that are more successful. But this is very hard to do, right? Very hard to do, because this seems very simple. What I'm proposing here is just 2 slides and it's easy. And I've sat down with thousands of leaders and gone over these things. And they'll always say, yes, absolutely, let's do it. But then they don't. Most companies, most leaders won't change. Why? Right? That's the critical thing, right? That's what we're kind of here today to talk about the men, because a lot of these leaders are men, right? I'm not saying that to be biased. I'm just being truthful. A lot of them are women too. And a lot of this is true to women. But I'm focusing on men today because obviously that's the focus of the day. A lot of these barriers are real. They're truly real, right? People see them and struggle with them every day. So these are the 5 areas I'm going to look at. And then we'll look into, okay, what do you do, right? And why do you do it? So men's mental health is a big area, undoubtedly. We've probably all dabbled in some areas, right? You heard Howard talking about it to quite some degree earlier. And he will know that in much more depth than I will be going in to a much greater degree. But it's a critical area. Leadership itself, though, has its own separate sort of subsect of mental health. So I'll look at that very briefly. There's some historical traits, particularly on the male side of things. There's leadership traits we look for, that sort of strong man. The leadership culture in general, and then just the overall organizational culture, the 5 that I'm going to look at. All right. And I hope you're liking the slide. I found this slide, I thought it was kind of perfect for today. Okay, so men's mental health. As you can see, ChatGPT was very useful at building images for me. So there's multiple areas out there, right? But mental health is a fragile area. Suicide is obviously a big topic for men. It's much more likely in men than it is in women. That's no way to diminish any suicide or suicide attempt, but it is a prevalent issue. And fascinatingly is that you tend to talk about suicide about being a young man's thing, right? Going through teenage years, struggling with a new body, a new life, trying to identify who you are. But actually the highest rates are in that middle-age grouping, where a lot of people are leaders, where they are in high-pressure roles. There's a lot of expectation of them. And we'll come back to that. It's a very important topic. Substance abuse is a big issue, right? And this is what's so wonderful. We've got just the right speakers here for this today, right? Gwen will be talking about this later on. And again, much more detail than I ever could. But it's a big area. There's a lot of reliance on outside help in the form of in a bottle or pills or whatever it may be that's being used and is very, very common. It's hard to pick up a newspaper now and not hear that London is the cocaine capital of the world, right? There's a lot of it going on. There's a lot of issues with men not getting diagnosed, not able to gain help, or even going to seek it in the first place. And that also comes from the fear. The societal expectations on men is pretty high. as it is on women, just usually a slightly different focus, right? They lean into the traditional identities. With women, the traditional leads into more the motherhood side of things. With the man, it leads more into the sort of fearless leader type thing, cannot show weakness kind of logic. But those four together are four key areas that really give a pretty shaky foundation for men to grow from. And especially if you're thinking of a very complex world with all changing, moving parts, not a great starting place. We then add to that the concept of sort of leadership mental health. So not just men in general now, but just leadership. One of the biggest ones, undoubtedly, is traditional masculine viewpoint, because it's the one that sort of says, well, don't seek help, don't say anything's wrong, don't admit the weakness, therefore don't change, don't be open to change. Opening to change is weak. This is undoubtedly one of my biggest issues when I'm talking to leaders and trying to help them shift and expand and change their lives. A lot of the time there'll be resistance. And that's a really interesting point. It's a real problem, because they will then not want to talk about it or not be open to it, or at least brush it off, right? So this traditional viewpoint is a real blocker. It's definitely the biggest areas. General focus on leadership and mental health. There's a huge amount of pressure there. Right, so the previous slide, a lot of that is caused by the pressure that comes with being a leader. Right, we tend to think of leaders as having a lot of benefits, right? More money, more power, and those are undoubtedly true. But the payoff to that is, of course, well, there's going to be a lot of pressure and expectation. Right, if you fail, it's on you, kind of logic. Right, so it's kind of a big area. And then there's other areas, like the barriers to actually seeking help. Right, they don't tend to look for help because they don't want to show that weakness, so they're going to therefore continue potentially damaging behaviors. But then there's also, and this one's quite a fascinating one, is the fact that the concept of masculinity, of what a man is, has been evolving. Right, if you look at somebody who's 20 compared to someone who's my age, for example, there's quite a difference of what the concept of a man is. Right, and I think for a lot of people in leadership right now, that's very confusing, possibly conflicting. Right, I think they're really struggling with that. I think that's a problem that is going to be continue and get worse probably. A lot of people that I sit down in the leadership space right now will say their biggest fear, the biggest problem is dealing with young people coming to the workplace. And they'll vocalize it as they don't work very hard, they only want to work from home kind of comments. But they're really talking about is just the differences between them and how they view masculinity. Really, it's just a big difference to the approach. Okay, and on to another area, another barrier. So probably all of you have seen this because a lot of you are in this space. If you haven't, it's a very, very, very important area. Psychometrics. Psychometrics are used by psychologists to look at and understand people's personalities. A lot of them are based on Myers-Briggs, which most of us psychologists, well, I take that back. A lot of them do. I don't use Myers-Briggs. It was created by a couple of ladies who were not psychologists, had no scientific training, and so anything based on them, it's not evidence-based. So I'm personally not interested in it, just because I've got to argue a point to somebody, and if it's not data-based, I struggle. Ocean, though, the Big Five personality, is based on data, much more usable, and I won't go into it deep. I know we don't have time. Just one area to focus on, though. In openness, which is a critical area for leaders to be able to say, hey, I want to learn. Hey, I'm bringing new ideas. Hey, let's innovate, be creative. We have this leaning towards consistent and cautious. And it's right next to it, conscientiousness, efficient and organized. Now, if you think of most male leaders, they want to be seen as consistent, cautious, and organized, right? So we're leaning them towards that, right? So they're pulling away from being inventive and curious. So you actually find what we're looking for, what we're typifying leaders towards, is driving them away, trying new things. So all of these environmental factors are what we expect them to be like. It's pulling them away. Okay, we're almost done with this section. We're getting there. This is the fourth slide of the 5. Leadership culture is the fourth area. So leadership culture really drives leaders to one way of working. Nearly all organizations you'll see out there, nearly all, their goal is simple: avoid errors. We don't want errors. We don't want to show mistakes. We don't want to show that we've made failures. So they have a bias towards not doing anything. If we move, if we try something, we might make a mistake. Ergo, don't try anything. So lots of leaders I meet will say, yeah, absolutely, we should do that. But we're really busy right now. We'll do that another time, which is code for we're never going to do it. But I'm saying the right words. Yeah. So bias for inertia is staggering. It is almost the most common thing I see. It's everywhere. Because risk-taking, by definition, has risks. But if you want to achieve excellence, you've got to have a bias towards it. And that means you've got to try things. You've got to go, well, we're here now. We want to get better. Right? We're good at the moment. We want to achieve more. But that's risky. Right? Most CEOs are not rewarded for taking risks like that. Most boards and most shareholders want a continual slow yield. They don't want to take chances. Right? So yeah, it's a problem. And for leaders, men in this situation, this is a struggle. Because if they take that risk, it could backfire. So why take the risk, right? It's kind of like a lottery win. Isn't it safer just to stay and not go for it? Then to the final area, the actual company culture. Now this feeds off the leadership culture, but it's bigger, right? It's the entire organization. So changing this is even harder. People talk about organizational transformations. It doesn't really happen. It's not really a true thing. You can look back and say we've changed, but you don't change culture by transforming it, primarily because culture is extremely hard to define. If you try to define, I don't know, British culture, how would you define it, right? To some people, it's fish and chips, right? To some other people, it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be a certain type of rap music or something. It's going to be a certain type of clothing, or it's going to be something very different. The point is, it's different for everybody. It's not all encompassing. Not everyone agrees. Culture is not something that everyone's going to align to. So you can't really define it. So when you say cultural transformation, generally looking in hindsight, we used to be there. Now we're doing something different, right? So we don't tend to look for actual cultural transformation. It's not the best way to approach it. Anyway, when we're thinking about the culture we do have, how we think, how we behave, how we interact, hustle culture is quite common. We see it a lot, right? People are pushing, they're tired, they're driven. A lot of the organizations I work with are in this space, particularly in finance, things like that. It's very much do more, do more, do more. We talk about what's on the right, building better organizations, healthier, prioritizing time, people taking space, valuing relationships, having a good focus on values. But over and over and over again, it's not actually seen. It's being said, but it's not being created. And the leaders and the men are not delivering on that. So what do we do? Right? That's enough on what's the problem. How do we move this? How do we change this? How do we go forwards? Right? So first things first, right? This is absolutely critical. Whenever you want to do change, start with empathy. Meet men where they are, not where you want them to be. You can't turn around and say men should be here, right? You can't say that to anybody, really, right? You've got to accept where they are. That's the first thing, right? So if you think about that, what does a male leader look like? Well, they'll be saying things like, I am strong, I know I'm going, you should follow me, right? That's what they're probably saying. They've got that strength, right? And they'll be seeking those successful outcomes, repeats of the past. They'll be pushing to do more and be successful, right? To really drive in that way. And so it's a real thing to be thinking, well, if they're saying things and doing things that way, that's how they're putting out there. So realize that they're not finding it easy. That's what they're trying to do. But they're probably thinking things like imposter syndrome, right? What if I'm found out? What if I'm not worthy? How do I do this, right? They can't show weakness, but they still have to succeed. They can only ever succeed. So it's a really difficult problem to be in, really tricky, right? So we need to have real empathy with that and recognize how difficult that is, right? And they're probably not going to be asking for help. They probably feel quite alone. Yeah, there's a big pressure to see that weight of expectation. So that's where we've got to start. We've got to recognize this, right? So we go in with empathy, not telling them what to do, but asking. So the big step for me is reframing. We can't go in and just say, let's change, right? We've got to view it as well, why change? And I think that the big key here, the big message from all this is that Leaders shouldn't change unless there's a reason to change. They shouldn't change because it's better for their mental health. That's not a good enough reason. They won't change for that because they've heard that line before. They don't really care about it. That doesn't match their desire to win, and they don't want to be shown to fail. And that would be seen to be weak to say, oh, so mental health, right? But if you can reframe it as being useful to the business to make them more successful, now you're going places. Now you're going somewhere, right? So number one here, if you turn around and say, what you've done in the past got you here, but it won't get you where you're going, right? We probably all know that phrase. That's what we're talking about here. In a world of innovation, of globalization, of competition around the world, you can't continue what you're doing. You've got to shift. You've got to think more to the future, right? Staying where you are isn't going to get you where you want to be going. So there's got to be some rethinking there. So provide that openness to them, not because they need to change because they're wrong, but rather the world is shifting. You need to help them realign that thinking. So it's reframing of the approach. Also, the steadfastness they've had here in number two, whether it's kept them where they were, has been good. It's been solid, but it's got to be balanced with some change, right? We can't stay where we are all the time. So we've got to build some more change in there. So a measured approach. It's also thinking about the environment they're trying to build for the organization. If they want to become more innovative, they need to get the ideas from within the company. They need to build empowerment. So they've got to build an environment of change within the system, within their people. Otherwise, they can't move forward. They're going to be stuck there, right? So they're focused on the leadership mindset of where they're going to go, but also what changes to make in their organization to find that innovation, to build that empowerment. And then we want to think about empathy, specifically with the leaders here. And so we talk about inclusivity almost as being a trend in leadership. Oh, that's a focus right now, DE&I and things like that. To bring that in, it's a critically important topic, but it is a new trend that's come in. And so these trends is at work. We need to shift that into inclusivity is important because you want to bring in strong leaders, different thinkers, and all of them come together, right? Now, different thinkers could be different departments, could be different types of leaders, could be people with diverse thoughts, such as somebody with autism or something, right? But the point is you bring that in and you create more of an equal ground, right? That reframing, again, is reshifting things. Yeah. So it's really these subtle things about how you can reframe their approach. And it's got to be in a safe way, as I say, meeting them where they are, not where you want them to be. I love this image. I had fun with this. It's sort of 1980s into sort of future. So just playing with that. Traditionally, we were very sort of in that 1980s world of make money, make money, make money. And there is still some of that around, let's be honest about it. Capitalism has not gone away. There's a lot of money in the world and people want to get more of it. But we were very focused on stoicism from that, very much being solid, right? That was the right way. But we are now facing more innovation, more globalization. You can't compete with China by staying still, right? It's not going to work. We can win through other ways that are more focused on how we be more innovative, right? We build a more empowered workforce. You can move faster than technology. And so in that sense, the change of the male approach can be welcomed because it's not reducing it. It's not weakening it, taking away its strength. It's rather taking that strength and refocusing it, right? And that's less fearful. That's not as scary. And so in that sense, we've got to create that mindset that says we're looking towards the future with a more innovative mindset that means men are able to change to support that. So leaders need to change and shift to take on that approach. And so it's very much they need to shift their mindset to something that can give them something different. And this is where it gets tricky. This is a change model that's been seen all over the world. Some of you will be familiar with it. It's a pretty common one. I apologize, it's a bit fuzzy. I just didn't want to use one. This is one without a license, so that it's a little bit fuzzy. This is such a change model, and quite simply explains what happens when you introduce change. So if I bring a new idea, such as I'm suggesting now, about shifting a leadership mindset in a man, the first thing you will get is resistance, right? You come with an idea, whatever it is, you'll get resistance. right? And then you've got to work with them and help them through it. And they will go through chaos, right? They will not like it. They'll struggle with it. It'll feel different. And during that time period, their productivity, their performance goes down. They get worse at their job effectively. This is the cost, what I would call an investment, right? The intention, though, is once they go through that, once they start to accept it, which is 3A, that transforming idea, once they start to accept this new way of thinking, they can integrate it and they get better. This new status quo, which is that higher level performance, right, can achieve more, the organization, the leaders, more successful, right? But any change you make, whether it's you turn around, try to learn a new, sorry, stop being able to speak there, try to learn a new language, or any new skill you want to try and do, you will have this same kind of curve. When you try and do something new, you'll have chaos as you try and learn something, right? Tracy talked all about neuroplasticity. It's a great thing that we can learn, but it takes a lot of time to settle in, for us to really take it on board and learn new concepts, new ways of doing things. So this results in this. ADKAR as a change model been around for about 5 decades now. I just changed ADKAR a little bit. I added empathy. I don't think you can change anything, a person or organization, without adding empathy. You need to understand where they are. You can't approach somebody and just say, change. Here's awareness, here's something, you do it, right? You must approach them and go, I want to understand your problem, your situation, where you are. You create equality, you can then work with them, right? They'll want to listen to you because you've got a connection, and what you then will be giving them information-wise will be relevant to them because you can tailor it, right? You know more about them, so you are able to tailor it. So when I go and I work with leaders, EADCAR is roughly what I follow. I try to understand this current situation, show empathy, connect with them, right? And then I can try and bring that awareness, try and bring in new ideas, new topics. As long as I do that in a good way, as long as I'm selling it in a way, I can build desire in them. They can go, oh, that's interesting. I do want to try that. That is of interest to me. So I provide more knowledge. I add more to back up that initial interest. This builds an ability. They can then go and try something. They can go and practice it. They can go and give it a go. They'll struggle with it, right? That's some of the chaos I showed you in the last slide. So you need to keep reinforcing it. It's not permanent. You'll need to keep reinforcing it to make sure they've got the knowledge and the ability to move forwards. All right. But in this way, we can help men take on change and understand it and not be so resistant. This change model really can, in my experience, is very, very helpful. So what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? I think overall, it's a realization that men do need to change, not because they're bad, not because they've done anything wrong, but because the world is changing, the world is shifting. And so I think we as men need an awareness that there is a shift and it's now an opportunity. And anyone in business, anyone in an organization that is experiencing all these things, there's an opportunity here to be seen that we can shift in a different way and become more successful. It's not to be feared, although all change potentially does cause fear. It's the fact that if we can change in this way, if we can innovate in this way, it's not just for the individual saying you should change, the world's moved on, you need to fix yourself. No, it's the opportunity for the business that should drive it. And in that sense, we can sell it to leaders. We can say to men or women, the world's changing. Let's think about, do you have the right mindset for this new world? And if we don't, well then let's look and see how we reshape that, how we realign, so that this organization can be as successful as possible. And in that sense, this resistance to change, the problems that men are facing, we can realign them towards success because it is an opportunity if we can look at it in that way. Okay. And thank you very much. That's my talk for today.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified health practitioner for guidance. Opinions expressed by guests are their own and are independent of this podcast. Thank you for listening.